Hello, this is Dr. Jason Munsell. It is about 5:20 p.m. On Thursday, July 17th. Sorry I'm getting to this late. I've been going through this most of the day. And then I got sucked into the horrible disaster with the Malaysian flight. Watching that news. But in any case, I'm going to try to be as brief as I can here because I know you all have a lot of work to do, and also I want to remind you that you got several things to do Sunday at 5 p.m. You have your second tweet, your second blog, your second email. I've already received some of those emails. That's great. I haven't checked Twitter or Tumblr for a few hours, so you might have new stuff up now. And then, of course, your first paper is due. And again, I'm willing to look at rough drafts if you can send them to me in a timely manner. But of course, if it's due Sunday at 5 o'clock, if you send me something on Sunday, I won't be able to get to it and turn around. But maybe if you get me something tomorrow, I could try to look through something on Saturday. But nonetheless, please let me know if you do have any questions. I will have my live sort of virtual office hours tonight. But very quickly, I thought this was a really, really interesting chapter. I hope you did as well. It's all about family or CMC and family communication, but then dives into a lot of stuff regarding gender. And so it's really, really interesting. Because it takes sort of a critical lens to all of this stuff, so it goes beyond, I think, some of the stuff that some of the previous chapters have done. Slide 2, just the whole idea about family, and we have yet another abbreviation, ICT, which is the information communication technology. That starts on the very first page of this chapter, 194. But remember that ICT is a type of CMC, and I would also think it's a type of SNS, as remember. Social networking sites, SNS, and so again, I know it's confusing. You got all this sort of stuff, all these sort of abbreviations, and some of them sort of refer to one another. But academics love abbreviations. Again, LOL, OMG, yes indeed. The next little thing is this notion of ubiquitous computing, also known as invisible technology. A lot of people refer to this as invisible technology. And that's also part of the larger picture of this particular chapter and all the other chapters. That basically just means that we use computing devices and technology throughout our entire day, and it's so pervasive for a lot of us we don't even think about it. We get up, we check our email, we see if we got a text or whatever. So we use it so much, we are like fish in the ocean, and we don't notice the ocean because we're always in the ocean. And technology is our ocean. And so it's just so part of our fabric of life that sometimes we don't take heed of it or don't take notice of it, but we should. And then the whole thing, and one of the themes that comes out of this entire chapter are these various paradoxes. You could boil all this stuff down to say that CMC is a blessing and a curse. It's all paradoxical. By the way, my father, who also has a PhD, when I got my PhD and at LSU in 2000, the first thing he said to me was, "Guess what we are?" I said, "What?" And he said, "A paradox." So you know where I've got my sense of humor. But the bottom of page 194 is pretty important, and it just sort of it talks about this whole paradox throughout the entire chapter. Basically, and I've already sort of said this, but as all this stuff, technology is supposed to make stuff easier for us, but at the same time, it makes things harder for us. It connects us and binds us and separates us. So all these various sort of paradoxes it means to help us work more efficiently, but it extends work. We work longer and harder, it seems. So all these sort of things about the whole thing is sort of a paradox. I think is really, really important to consider and to think about. The next thing that I wanted to do, I want to sort of take a little bit of a detour, and so slide 3 is trying to help you understand where they're coming from. And again, I said they take a much more sort of critical tone here than some of the other chapters do. And I would argue they take sort of a feminist lens. And I don't want to scare you if you don't really know what feminism is as sort of an academic theory per se. I know there's the stereotype of the feminist, and I consider myself a feminist because I think that humanity is good, which is basically what a feminist is, but in a sense. Well, it depends. Well, I don't know. Not today with the damn plane crash or missile they're saying now. Wow. But basically, there is no set definition of feminism necessarily, as I say in the slide. It's a very fluid term, and there are different types or kinds of feminist: liberal, radical, cultural, and it's not important that you know the definitions of all those different types of feminist. And we also generally thought we have like 3 or more waves of feminism, starting way back when with the suffrage movement, and then ERA, and then some contemporary things. But basically, here's the definition of feminism from Sonja Foss in her book on rhetorical criticism. And rhetorical criticism, by the way, you might learn about this in some other classes. And I think I might have mentioned this in the syllabus. It's a mode of critical analysis, looking at how discourses like CMC structure or invite us to think about the world in a certain place. Basically, it's analyzing speeches, but we can see pretty much everything as a speech because everything's always trying to persuade us to see the world in a certain way, whether that persuasion is intentional or not. Finn, please go check your email. So basically, this is what Sonja Foss says. Feminists do not believe that oppression and domination are worthy human values and seek to eradicate the ideology of domination that permeates Western culture. They want to transform relationships and the larger culture so that the patriarchal values and traits of alienation, competition, imperialism, elitism, control, and dehumanization that characterizes interaction under an ideology of domination are disrupted. They seek instead to contribute to the development of relationships that culture is characterized by self-determination, equality, fairness, responsibility, affirmation, a valuing of others, acknowledgement of the interdependence of all life forms, and respect for others. That sounds pretty good to me. I'm signing up. So, it's all about having choice. The term agency means having options, having choice, being liberated so you can make the choices that you want to make in your life. Now, with that being said, and all this stuff, you have to also understand what patriarchy is if you didn't know what patriarchy is. It is that system of domination that they are against. So patriarchy is basically the sense that traditional masculine values become the values that we celebrate in our culture, and also men have a lot more power than women. Things are changing, but of course that still exists. One of the things that's really important to me, though, that you understand about patriarchy is sort of the ideology, and ideology, by the way, is just sort of a system of values and perspectives and everything like that. None of this stuff is conscious per se. Some of the times, of course, it's conscious, but oppression and things like that are it's like invisible technology. I mean, we don't really know it's happening, and sometimes we contribute to our own oppression without even knowing it. It's like we were trying to save money or something like that, and we get all depressed, and what do? Retail therapy or something like that. I'm going to go buy I don't know. I like antiquing, so I like to go buy old things that I don't need. I like chairs. as Patsy said, you can sit on it. Okay, so and basically it's too easy to say that it is all very, very intentional or conscious. And this is where Foucault comes in, Michel Foucault, talking about how ideologies or dominant ideologies like patriarchy function within discursive formations. You know, for technology itself is sort of a discursive formation. How our discourse structures our society, our political systems, our schools, our absolutely everything. So in other words, patriarchy is bigger than a group of people. It's part of the overarching fabric of our history, particularly in the Western culture, historical and contemporary Western culture, and a lot of other cultures as well. So you sort of have to understand sort of that feminist lens and the nature of patriarchy to sort of understand where these folks are coming from sort of a critical perspective. And more before we sort of get into going back to the chapter. Slide 5 here. Remember that gender is a social construct. There is a big difference between gender and sex, and I think I've mentioned that before. A lot of people use those synonymously, but that's wrong. Sex is the biological, male or female, even though part of our discursive formation is that we don't appreciate the in-betweens. And even biologically, they're the in-betweens, but then they say there's something wrong with that, so they have to cut things off and various things like that. Which so sex to the biological, gender are the expectations of how we think people ought to behave and communicate in light of the biological. So when we're talking about gender, we're thinking more in terms of issues of masculinity and femininity. We train, we socialize young girls to be feminine. We socialize young males to be masculine. Boys don't cry. Girls play with dolls and all that type of stuff. So through culture, we learn gender norms, and there are oftentimes huge problems when we do not adhere to those norms. I mean, not from my point of view, but people can see us in sort of awkward ways. Though most of the research says we're all sort of androgynous, so to speak. We're all a little bit in between. We're all a little bit country, and we're all a little bit rock and roll. We're all a little bit Donnie, and we're all a little bit Marie. So a little bit feminist or feminine and a little bit masculine. But generally speaking, what we have seen through how culture has sort of created this, again, these are sort of stereotypes or norms. It's everything. Reality is always contextual. Generalizations are products of our imagination because generalizations don't exist in reality. There are only specifics. So generally speaking, particularly through media, it sort of teaches us that women are more dependent on men, and men are the independent ones. Women sometimes are shown as incompetent. They don't know how to do things, and men are the authority figures, like the inventors of technology. Though, of course, a lot more contemporary, particularly like sitcoms have always shown or recently shown the men as the buffoons. The third one is really the big one here, that women are the primary caregivers, and men become the breadwinners or the workers, and women are oftentimes seen as victims and objects of sexual desire, and a lot of our media sort of naturalizes that or make it just, that's why we have this horrible rape culture in our society, and men as aggressors, the whole thing, boys will be boys, which is actually stupid crap, but in any case. And you might think, again, that this is all natural, but it ain't. Yeah, women give birth, but our culture also socializes us to think of women as the caregivers. There is evidence, other cultures, other places where once the baby is born, men become the primary caregivers. So it is a cultural thing. So that's part of again, this entire chapter. Okay, and the thesis of the chapter, I'm on slide 6 now, which I think is a very, very cool thesis. And again, I really like this chapter because of this sort of critical thing, this critical stance. on page 195,